We are joined now, as we come down the home stretch of the Friday edition of the program, by Gerard Baker, former editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, now the editor-at-large. He's got a new book, American Breakdown: Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions and How We Can Rebuild Confidence. I'm looking forward to hearing some of your takes here, Gerard, but I want to start, and thanks for coming on with us. Love the newspaper, love the work you guys do at the Wall Street Journal, with what I would say is the biggest story of the week so far, and it's actually Joe Biden under siege. Washington Post top columnist says he shouldn't run. Hunter Biden indicted. A lot of people out there saying that it's time for Biden to step down. Do you think Joe Biden will be the Democrat nominee next year running for re-election, or do you think it'll be someone else?
Thanks very much indeed for having me on. It's very kind of you, and a good Friday afternoon to you and your listeners. I still think he will be. I mean, you're absolutely right. There does seem to be something afoot. That columnist in the Washington Post you talked about, some of the polling that we've seen out recently, some of the kind of, more chatter about Biden's poor performance at that press conference in Vietnam. Look, I think what's going on, I think the problem though that they have is they don't have a plausible alternative. That's really the Democrats' problem. I think, Joe Biden, I think the reason we're hearing about this right now is that for a long time it's been the conventional wisdom in Washington, wrong as usual, as the conventional wisdom usually is. But it's been the conventional wisdom that for all Joe Biden's faults, he'll beat Donald Trump. Donald Trump can't win the presidency. He can't win a general election. He can win the Republican primary. He can't win the presidency. I've always thought that was wrong. I've always thought it's nonsense. I think with the economy likely weakening next year, I think actually, the polling already shows Trump at least neck and neck with Biden. He could certainly win. And I think that realization that he could win, that Biden could lose, is starting to seep in. And I think that's starting to make some Democrats panic a little bit and think, oh God, not only we got this old guy who really isn't up to the job anymore, but after all that, he may lose to Trump. The problem is though, I don't think they have an alternative. If he steps down, who's it going to be? Kamala Harris probably is the inside track. That's frankly, I'm no Joe Biden fan, but that scares me even more than Joe Biden, than another 4 years of Joe Biden. Or, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, these are not names that I think are likely to be a shoo-in, or even frankly likely to be the favorite against Donald Trump. So I kind of think they're stuck with Biden.
Gerard, thanks for being here with us. So your book, American Breakdown: Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions and How We Can Rebuild Confidence. Why do we no longer trust leaders and institutions? What has changed? What have we learned? What have we seen that you get into in this book as people are going off onto their weekends here? I think it's worth getting into some of the underlying foundational philosophical issues here.
So I think there are factors. There are multiple factors that explain why people have lost trust in the major institutions, and the numbers are incredibly striking. I went back and looked in detail at them. Gallup takes these regular surveys. Other organizations do too. And trust as a whole in government, media, education, science and technology, big business, across the board, in all of these major institutions that kind of lead American life, trust has collapsed in the last 20 or 30 years or so. It's down across the board. Now, I think that's due to a number of factors that have to do with the specific institutions themselves. Frankly, people have decided that government lies to them, which who can blame them? Government has done a terrible performance in many ways over the last 20 years. It's got very big and is not doing things that people like. And I think that reason people don't trust the government. The media, we all know the stories of how the media, quite frankly, have become, have made stories up in the last few years, have become increasingly partisan, increasingly biased, increasingly in pursuit of an agenda. Big business has become incredibly woke. It's become globalist. It's very much focused on, global markets and global profits at the expense of Americans. So again, all of these things have been going on. If there's a defining common characteristic, though, I would say, and this is what I write about in the book, I think it is this. These elites that have taken control of these institutions, these people who all think alike, they have the same kind of views. They have the same views on American history, and they have the same views on race and gender and immigration and the importance of global cooperation and global integration. They've seized control of all of these institutions, and they are an elite. I don't really like using that word, but they basically are an elite. They have values that are fundamentally at odds with the values of most Americans. And this country was, I'm an immigrant, as you can probably tell from my accent. I came here 30 years ago. I've been a journalist in this country for 30 years. This is the greatest country on earth. Its history has been one of extraordinary success, built on the values that it was founded on. Obviously, it's needed to reform. There are a lot of bad things have gone on in American history, but the great achievement of America and the genius of America is that it's been able to reinvent itself and recreate itself, and based on fidelity to those core values. I think we are, unfortunately, now in all of our key institutions led by people, almost all of them anyway, who don't really share those values and who want to drive, who don't really want America to be America. They want America to be kind of like a European country, a social democratic country, or even maybe an Asian country. They don't share those values. So I think that's why people fundamentally don't trust their leaders anymore.
Is this something that a president can cure, the right president, or do you think it's something that's rotten at the core? And if so, how do you fix it?
It's going to require a president. It's going to require legislation, probably. It's going to require transformation of the legal system. I think we're already seeing that in terms of the direction of the Supreme Court. Look, I mean, one of the things I look at in the book is the history. If there's good news in this book, it's that we've been here before. I mean, America's had these periods before where trust in their leading institutions has declined sharply, where people feel alienated from their leading institutions. Look at the late 1960s in particular. I always say to people who throw up their hands and say, "Oh my God, things are terrible today." Go back and look at 1968. 1968, we had, hundreds of Americans were dying every week in a war. We had political assassinations, major political assassinations. We had political violence across the country. We had terrorism. The country was tearing itself apart, and it did overcome those divisions. It took a while. First of all, Richard Nixon was elected in 68 and then re-elected with a huge majority in 72. And he talked about the silent majority. And I think to some extent he was right about that. Obviously, talking of trust, I mean, his presidency ended in a collapse of trust with Watergate. And then we got through to the rest of the 70s in a pretty shambolic way. And then we got Ronald Reagan in 1980. So a president can, and then, by the way, that's when in the 1980s, that's when once again people did have faith in America and faith in America's institutions and leadership. So it takes time, it takes presidential intervention, it takes legislation, but above all, it takes a cultural change. And I think it takes people standing up and saying, we're not, and I think this is already happening. I think, again, there's more good news here because I think that's already happening. They're standing up and saying, we are going to assert American values, we're going to assert these ideals, and we're going to take our country back. And I think that, again, that is beginning to happen. It'll take time, but I'm confident that we'll get there.
Gerard Baker, his book, American Breakdown, Why We No Longer Trust Our Leaders and Institutions and How We Can Rebuild Confidence. Get your copy today. Go check it out. And Gerard, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you both. Thanks for having me.